Andy Schmuckler, here delivering what I call a series of a, a better human story. And part of it has to do with, well, the way I conceive it is that the secular worldview um, is a work in progress and it has some holes in it uh, that what I have to offer can fill. And it has some confusion in it on the question of value, which is one piece of the picture of what's missing in the liberal worldview. And I say this as somebody who's interacted with liberal audiences for, oh, well, at least 30 years, but maybe more. Um, and I can say that it is fairly widespread in liberal America with its predominantly secular worldview, an attitude about value that's been part of the problem. The problem that I've been talking about here for the last week or so, maybe two, that liberal America didn't see what was emerging on the political right. This is all connected. The way the people, many people, maybe predominant, thought about value was part of the picture of liberals not seeing that something that was consistently working to make the human world worse was taking control of the other side of the American political system. In order to take that seriously, you got to believe in that the word worse has some real meaning. And with liberal Americans that I've spoken with in various forums, a lot of people think that, well, you don't find value out there in the cosmos. I mean, you can't see it like you can see the mountain. Therefore, it's not real. It's subjective. It's a matter of opinion. Those kinds of things. I had a lot of encounter with. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that it is a major way that liberal, maybe the predominant way, is to give it sort of second class status, value. Value might be defined as that there's a meaningful way of talking about what's something being better and something being worse. I think that's a fundamental error about what it could possibly be, and I don't feel I don't feel confident that I can make my argument here successfully, because there's a point that I think is very important and to me kind of obvious, but I'm not all that good at showing in various ways that it's true and must be acknowledged. And that is that if you had a cosmos in which there was nothing experiencing its existence, and in which part of the dimension of what they experienced was that some things were better and some things were worse. If there was a cosmos where there was nothing experiencing things in terms of better and worse, of course, there's no value. There's no way there could be value. It would have no meaning to talk about value if there's nothing around to which it isn't all the same. Nothing with any kind of realm of experience, which has got this is better, experienced by the experiencer as better versus experienced as worse. What difference does it make if a planet explodes or a galaxy disappears or anything like that? What does anything matter? How could anything matter? So when the secular worldview adherents that I'm talking about say, well, it's subjective, which is what you hear a whole lot. It's subjective. That's the only way there could be any value, is in the experiential realm, in other words, subjectivity, of some creature for which there is a better and a worse. So forget about the just opinion. It may be subjective, but it is not arbitrary. And that's where the reality and life-serving nature and importance of the valuative dimension come in. When you've got life evolving on a planet, it's an opportunistic process. It really seems like wherever there's a way for life to form that can function in that ecological system, the biosphere, and perpetuate itself. Life is going to find a way to do that. Living off of hydrogen vents, living in drying seas, whatever the deal is. You get things going in the direction of plants, things in the direction of animals. You get, and it's such an inventive thing that you're looking at what nature has developed. All of these different species that find their way into the future, that replicate, that continue themselves. It's really quite astonishing. And one of the strategies that is essential, as we've seen as life has evolved on this planet, is that there be creatures who are motivated to do whatever it is that they need to do to survive and pass their DNA on to the future. Whether you can talk that way about oak trees or not, I mean, they produce, they do what they, but whether you can talk about motivation for an oak tree, it makes acorns. It will get it does what has been required to get itself into the future. But with us, and not just us, of course, there is motivation for sure in the animal world. So I don't know about plants, but we know it's widespread that there are a lot of creatures, species, whatever you want to call them, for which experience is divided into that which is better, that one is motivated to pursue, and that which is worse, that one is motivated to avoid the situation, or having whatever. The selective process, in other words, eventually creates a category of living things, and what all's in it, I don't know. Does a fly have experience of better and worse? I don't know how to think about what a fly has. I know my cats pretty well. It isn't just us humans. I mean, a cat that's being petted is happy, and that is simply experienced by the cat as better than a cat being tortured, and therefore the value is real. It is, in fact, something which emerges out of the evolutionary process. Out of a lifeless universe comes life. And out of the evolution of life, where the value eventually emerges in the living world in the form of whatever number of creatures you can talk about having an experiential dimension. But that is essential. Subjective, but not arbitrary, because we are endowed, the human DNA, we got our differences, but we got a whole lot in common. And a lot of what we've got in common has got to do with the experiential dimension. We can talk about human anatomy, even though my nose and your nose may be very different. They're both in the basic structure of a nose, and so on throughout the organs of the body. Likewise, we are born with a evaluative system within us, which motivates us to do what for our ancestors was good to be motivated to do, because it led to survival. That's how selection works. So there's a correlation between what feels good, if it feels good, do it. I mean, it turns out to be more complicated, especially in civilization. But anyway, if it feels like this is better, like the cat purring on your lap, as opposed to being tortured. If it feels good, that's because being motivated to pursue the happiness correlates with doing the things that turn out to be conducive to getting one's DNA into the future. In other words, being the future of the species. We are shaped to have motivations that are life-serving. And our motivations are grounded in the experience of value. Some things are better. It is better better to have a planet where all the experiential realm is as positive as it can be, as opposed to the misery that happens when you've got a force of brokenness that is running rampant in the world, which is another dimension of my better human story. But to stick right now with value, value is a quality of experience that correlates with what has been survival, what has served life. And therefore it is a real. It is real as in that it is better to have a future in which the experience of sentient creatures is better rather than worse. That's the only meaning it could possibly have. If you're not just thinking about creatures, if you're thinking about a God, well, okay, well, if God says, creates light and says, oh, it is good, well, he's using an evaluative word, and I'm willing to say that good exists in that cosmos. If God experiences, if he's the only thing around, he's enough to experience some things as better and some things as worse. But if you don't have that kind of a being with an experiential dimension of his or her or their own in your worldview, and I'd like to have it, but I really can't quite find my way to it. If you don't have that, and if you just sort of imagine the cosmos the way the scientists are telling about it, what you've got is a big bang, and I'm not aware of anybody talking about anything being better or worse. It's just this is what's happening, and it doesn't make any difference to anybody because we don't imagine there is anything at first. You know, even forming hydrogen atoms was something, let alone forging anything like us. And is there anything else, out there that isn't made of matter? I don't know. But I envision things in a kind of lifeless way. And then as life evolves, you've got the you've got an emergent reality that comes out of it. It is a reality which exists because of the way life and the experience of creatures that are alive evolves. And it brings value into the world. And it makes it better if we human beings can get our act together rather than destroy ourselves or plunge our world into such chaos that millions of people die because things have broken down or whatever the thing is. Fascism generally brings nightmares. It is better to have a democracy where the well-being of the average citizen is taken into account by the average citizen who gets a voice in what happens. Whereas fascism allows power seized by those who are good at seizing power to govern human destiny, which tends to be an ugly picture when power is unchecked and uncontrolled. That's what the essence of fascism versus democracy is. And we've just had an election in which the people didn't have it foisted upon them. They actually chose fascism about as more naked than I could have imagined would ever show its face in America. I lived through Nixon. I knew there was darker stuff going on than he let on. But this is way beyond that. Even with W's presidency, as John Dean said, that's worse than worse than Watergate was his book. But this is way worse than that. value is real. It is worse to have a fascist society than a democratic society. But running a democratic society apparently takes something which we have not had in America just now over the last generation. I don't know how far back to trace it. But part of the problem is we haven't been thinking about value as something real and important and life-serving. And so if you think it's only a matter of opinion, you don't notice quickly enough what's going on the other side of the political divide. You don't notice it's something that is consistently working to make things worse because you don't think worse really means all that much. It's a matter of opinion. It's just subjective. Other people may disagree. You encounter that some in liberal America in these times too, when I express essentially my certainty about certain things about what the nature of what has taken over conservative America, and the appropriateness of using words like a force of brokenness, a destructive force, or as I prefer, a force of evil. There are people who will say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but don't you realize that there are people on the other side who think just the opposite? In other words, it's really, if you got that opinion and they've got this opinion, you got that belief and they've got this belief, how are you going to be able to speak with any certainty? You can see why that kind of force wouldn't be very good at protecting the country if something that really should be condemned as a force of brokenness, a force of evil, were to emerge. Yeah, they do think the other way. That doesn't bring me to not see what I see. It just gets me to ask, well, how did those good people get to the point where they can't see what's right in front of their eyes? If all you got to do is say, well, all right, well, let's take a look at where these different points of view intersect with issues of clear factual truth. Let's take climate change, for example. Okay. The other side lives in a false world on climate change. It's quite obvious. Let's take Ukraine. The Trumpian side believes the liar in Moscow, or pretends to believe him, or at least supports him. It's consistent. Where are they on racial relations? They inflame the hostilities. They don't build bridges of caring and goodwill toward men, toward humans, whatever. Quite consistent. And it is worse in each case. They create injustice. They tell lies. They abuse their powers. It is quite consistent. They're factually wrong on climate change. The scientists will tell us that. They're factually wrong on the effects of immigration and the crime rate of immigration and whether the immigrants are eating people's pets. They are continually false in places where true and false have an obvious meaning. It's purely factual. We're not having to think about experiential dimensions and the reality of value. Well, so I say, on every count, Trump is pushing in the wrong direction. He's making things worse. And the good people in conservative America have somehow been led to mistake the evil for the good. I'm not going to say, well, in my humble opinion. I mean, it's quite demonstrable. It's just, whole shelves of books could be written demonstrating that there's a force of brokenness that has taken over the American right and is constituting an unprecedented threat to the survival of American democracy. People talk about, since the Civil War. I don't see the Civil War as being the same kind of threat to American democracy. That was a threat to break the country into two different countries. The United States of America, the Confederate States of America. Okay. The American Constitution was drawn up to include all the colonies and then all the states that had been admitted since. And the secession of the South called into question whether that whole framework was going to continue to apply to the whole chunk of North America that it had. But that wasn't, there was never a question, I don't think, in anybody's mind whether Pennsylvania and New York and Massachusetts were going to be democratic polities or part of a democratic nation. It was just a question of whether North Carolina and Georgia were going to be, and Virginia were going to be part of the same nation. But this time we are facing the transformation of the nation as a whole, the formerly indispensable nation, the leader of the free world, the beacon of the city on a hill, is going to continue to be a democracy, or as now seems more probable than I would have guessed any time in the last 4 years, probable to maybe become a fascist, authoritarian, dictatorial, whatever word you like, nation of the kind that we used to stand up against. Recognizing that the dimension of better and worse corresponds with the pursuit of happiness, which corresponds with life enduring into the future, because we are motivated to do what served the survival needs of our ancestors. And that means that the motivational system, the experiential realm that gets selected for, has a better and worse dimension. It is real. It is important. It is life-serving. And the same kind of argument can be made for the reality, importance, and life-serving nature of the spiritual dimension. And I think if I've got the stamina, I'm going to come back and see if I can show that evolution has created an emergent reality. Again, not just better and worse now, but a spiritual thing. And I'll define spiritual as best I can. I mean, it's a little bit ineffable. And then I'll show why it is that in an evolutionary perspective, people of a secular worldview should recognize and embrace the reality, importance, and life-saving nature of the spiritual dimension, and not give the spiritual dimension the kind of second-class status that a lot of people with a secular worldview do. So it's part of the same project of filling in the holes and correcting some defects in a secular worldview that's still a work in progress. It's that the dominance of the religious point of view has been fairly quickly been reduced, and has been born a society with a secular worldview that hasn't worked out all the implications of understanding what's going on in our world in ways that the religious worldview actually understood better, like the battle between good and evil, and like the reality of a spiritual dimension. So I'll be back to talk about the spiritual soon. Recommend, like, subscribe, if you would. Thank you. I'm told that I should ask for these things. Maybe it's getting tiresome to hear, but I would appreciate it. And I particularly want to invite people to see if I can deliver some of the goods that I've been talking about in a systematic way that you find irresistible, compelling, proven, more or less. So betterhumanstory.org, where a lot of writings done over a lot of years to draw an integrated picture of the forces at work in the human world has been my life's work, and it's laid out there for you.